Okay, so now it says it's recording from here.
Oh yeah, now it says recording up there.
Okay. So I'm just gonna pause, resume recording.
Okay.
Okay, so it says it's
right.
recording.
Okay, I'm gonna admit all.
Okay.
Here we go. Morning, everyone.
Welcome to study session number 2 on this beautiful Saturday morning. We should be getting up the code to join Pear Deck. So if you would go to joinpd.com and put in the code and get yourselves logged into Pear Deck. We get everybody logged into Zoom and logged into Pear Deck. We'll get ourselves underway. Our code is NMNYQP. So we're very happy that you guys joined us this morning. Beautiful Saturday morning. You're taking the time to spend just over an hour with us today. We're very appreciative of that. And once you get yourselves in, make sure that you go over and join Pear Deck at joinpd.com. The code is up in the chat. If you can't see that, it's NMNYQP. Again, our code to join Pear Deck is NMNYQP. So if you could get yourselves in and logged into Pear Deck, we can get ourselves going here shortly. And for those of you who are just joining us, we'd like you to go join into the Pear Deck session at joinpd.com. And our code is NMNYQP.
All right, we have about 17 people in the Pear Deck, and we have 51 people in the Zoom meeting. So again, if you will please head on over to joinpd.com. Lily, that's a really cute avatar. Your dog is super cute.
Again, we'd just like to welcome everybody to our Saturday student study session number 2. And if we can get you guys all to log in to Pear Deck at joinpd.com. Our code is NMNYQP. Again, that code is NMNYQP.
If we have any teachers that are joining us, welcome and good morning. If you'll just message myself, the co-host or the host, so that we can just jot your names down. Kiddos, if you have any questions during the presentation, you can just raise your hand or you can type it in the chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat box this morning.
All right, we got about just over 30 of you logged into Pear Deck, but we've got 50 participants here in our classroom. So if you haven't logged into Pear Deck yet, please do so at joinpd.com. Our code is NMNYQP. And we're going to get ourselves going here in just a moment. We want to make sure that we are judicious with our time. We don't want to hold you guys any longer than what we need to, because we do appreciate your time and you taking the time out of this beautiful Saturday morning to sit with us.
Okay, Liam, is that your dog or is that I have 4 dogs. I'm obsessed with all dogs. Is that your dog wearing the cool sunglasses there?
All right, we are at about 10:02 from what my clock is saying. So why don't we get ourselves going here. Again, if you have not joined into Pear Deck, please do so at joinpd.com. Our code is NMNYQP. You will see that also up in the chat section of Zoom. So if we could get you guys all logged in over there, we can get ourselves started. So again, welcome. We are doing student study session number 2, where we are going to talk about using evidence to support a claim tonight. Actually, we're doing today, not tonight. So before we get going though, it's always good for you to kind of know a little bit about me. My name is Mr. Swift. I have been teaching AP courses for about 12 years now. I've taught multiples of the history ones, from AP Euro to AP World, AP Gov, AP US. So fairly familiar with all of the essays and stuff that you're going to be needing to write that we're going to be focusing on tonight. I was also one of the authors of the syllabus that A+ College Ready is using for your teachers for this class. So without any ado, let's make sure that everybody can hear me okay. If you could just give me a yes or a no for an answer. All right, so it's looking like most people are able to hear me and see what's going on. If you do run into any problems as we get going, feel free to put a note up in the chat, and we will answer those questions as they come up. Okay, so let's take a look at our goals for today. We are going to review AP World content. And in that, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about dates. I always get asked, Mr. Swift, do dates matter? And the answer in simple terms is yes and no. So we're going to take a look at what dates kind of matter, why they matter, and then we're going to take a look at also about facts, because as I'm sure you have realized to this point in time, there is a lot of information that you are learning and that is being presented to you. And it can be very overwhelming, and we understand that. So we're going to kind of give you some strategies on how to know what best facts to be able to remember, those things that are important and what might not be so important. We're also going to review some AP writing skills to help you answer the questions. And we're going to be focusing in on our thesis and making a good argument today. We're also going to take a look at the time periods and which ones are the most important. We are in like beginning third of our course. So we're going to kind of look at those ones and focus in on those today. But out of those ones, we're going to take a look at which ones are going to be the most important. And we're going to see kind of what the test is going to look like. So before we get going with this, a lot of my students, when they first start, there's no way that I'm going to pass this test. This is just way too much. There's too much information here. So to kind of rest your issues with that part of it, let's take a look at how they score the exam. AP uses a 5-point scale, and it is considered a 3 or higher a qualifying score. So if we add up those percentages of our 3, 4s, and 5s of people who scored those, of the hundreds of thousands of people that take this exam, we can see we've got 28 and then roughly 19%. So it's at 30, 47 plus another 9, which is 56. So about 56% of the people that take this test do get a qualifying score. So if you think about it in those terms, this really is not an insurmountable task for you. And if we can give you some good strategies for taking the test, you will do much better on it than you think you might. So let's get into content. Our course starts with the year 1200, and the first section deals with from 1200 to 1450. So within that, one of the things that you're going to want to do is to get some good facts and good information about things that deal with multiple geographic regions. And we can see from the chart here over on the left-hand column, it lists out all the geographical regions that there are, from the Middle East to East Asia, Europe, Africa, South Asia, Latin America, North America, Oceania, and Southeast Asia. And taking a look at our grid across there and the years that are there, our big yellow line there, it represents the year 1200. So we're going to focus in from our yellow line over to the right. If we take a look at there, we see that there are a few things that show up in multiple regions. And that would be, if you're spotting things in the light blue that keeps showing up, that would be our Mongol Empire. So knowing about the Mongol Empire is going to be a very good empire. Knowing facts about the Mongols is going to be one of those topics that you're going to want to make sure that you remember, because it hits multiple geographic regions and they also hit multiple key topics. We also kind of take a look at people too in this section. And there's one person that really shows himself all the way across, and that is Marco Polo. So if we're taking a look at our grid here and saying, okay, what are the best facts that we're going to need to know? We are going to want to remember Marco Polo as a person, because he is from Europe. He travels over to Asia. He hangs out with the Mongols. So he deals and hits multiple geographic regions. He hits multiple key topics because he's all into trade. He gets himself into politics. And he also deals with our Mongols. And our Mongols, as we know, also go across many geographic regions. And they deal with economics and the trade section of peace. Religion shows up with them. Politics shows up with them. So knowing those few things will aid us in answering our questions, because when they ask questions, they typically ask them in terms of regions and general timeframes. All right, so moving on. Let's take a look at our first kind of third of the course that we've been dealing with so far. We've hit Unit 1 and Unit 2, the global tapestry and networks of exchange, the ones that go from 1200 to 1450. But if we take a look at Unit 3, which is what we're in now, which jumps into our timeframes of 1450 to 1750, taking a look at those 3 units, which one do you think we should put most of our effort into? Would it be Unit 1, the global tapestry unit? Would it be Unit 2, the networks of exchange unit? Or would it be number 3, the land-based empires? I'll give you a moment to think about that and get your answers recorded. All right, we got, most of you are kind of following along in the right track. Remember, we're looking at the percentages. So our exam percentages that we have between Unit 1, 2, and 3. And we're looking for the one that has the largest percentage of those 3. All right, great. It's looking like most of you did pick number 3, because that percentage of our overall exam is 12 to 15%. And our other 2 are 8 to 10%. Now, not that they're not important, and we do need to know a little bit about those, but like we said before, if we know about the Mongols and we know about Marco Polo, we probably can answer a lot of the questions that would be given to us from College Board on our exam. So we're going to be putting some time today into our land-based empires, our Unit 3 empires, and we're not going to spend any more time on our 1200 to 1450. So taking a look at this map, we can see our land-based empires that were there in the world from 1450 to 1750. Now, looking at that map, things that we want to focus in on here, like we talked about before, which of these land-based empires deal with multiple geographic areas? So meaning which kind of continents do they sit in? Do they sit in more than one? And if they do, which ones are the ones that sit in more than one? Because those are the ones that we are going to want to make sure that we focus in on, because they're going to be the ones that we can utilize whatever the question geographic area is asking us. So out of these, take a look at them. Think of 4 of them that would probably be a very good ones to have an idea about. And is there one that kind of really stands out, which would be probably the best one to know? I'll give you a moment to kind of take a look at those and think about that. Okay, so remember, we're taking a look at our map. We're seeing which of these land-based empires cover multiple geographic regions. Remember, when we say multiple geographic regions, we're really meaning which continents kind of do these things sit in. So kind of think it that way. Now, not all of these will sit in different continents, but they cover multiple geographic regions. So I'm sure in your thought process of all this, you saw the Ottoman Empire, and our Ottoman Empire part of it sits in Europe. Another part of it sits in the Middle East, and then the other part sits in Africa. So our Ottoman Empire is probably the biggest empire that we're going to want to make sure that we're focusing in on in our time frame from 1450 to 1750, because it covers 3 geographic regions. Now, they're not the only ones that cover multiple geographic regions. We got the Russian Empire, which covers Asia as well as into parts of Europe. So those are ones that we want to be able to see too. But if we take a look over in our Aztec Empire, granted they're a big empire in South America, but they really don't cover more than just that area. So we're going to kind of stay away from them, and we're going to stick over with our Ottoman Empire as one that we're going to focus on mainly in this, because they are the one that covers the most geographical areas. So some of the empires that were here that kind of show themselves up. We've got our Qin dynasty here, and dealing with multiple key topics. We've got Manchu, and the civil service exam was their ways of keeping their control over the people. Aztecs in their tribute system. Our College Board sees them and calls them Mexica. So if you ever see Mexica on your exam, they really mean the Aztecs. And of course, our Ottoman Empire with the Devshirme, the Janissaries, and the religion of Islam, and our Mughals and their Zamindars. So these are our kind of our big regions and our big land-based empires covering the main topics that are there. And in those, if we can remember these facts, simple facts about each of these, now we've got ourselves kind of more focused on information that we can utilize as evidence on our questions. Okay, so getting into here some more content. We are now taking a look again at our land-based empires and their influences across the world. And we're talking again from 1450 to 1750 now. And take a look at this one. And I want you to jot down some of those empires that go across many different geographical areas. Okay, like we did before when we saw about the Mughal empires, we're looking for the empires that show up in different geographical areas. And I'll give you about 60 seconds here to take a look at those, jot some things down, because we're going to be utilizing some of this information when we start talking about our thesis. So again, you're making sure that you're looking for those empires that cross many geographical areas. All right, let's give you about 10 more seconds to wrap up and what you're looking at and taking a couple of notes if you've got something to do that with. All right, some of the things you should have written down. If we see our Spanish Empire, that is in several different regions. We see it not only in Europe, but we also see them in Latin America. They also have some influence down in Southeast Asia. Our Portuguese Empire, again, has themselves in different geographical areas. So hopefully you saw some of those places, empires in those different areas and made note of those. All right, let's move on because we don't want to spend a lot of time on content because we want to really get into writing theses today. So again, now let's take a excuse me. Here, we're going to take a look again at our belief systems now across the world and see where those belief systems are showing up in which empires and which parts of the world. So again, all of this that we've been talking about today is we're talking about those key facts and those empires that cover multiple geographic areas. So on this one, we're looking at belief systems and taking a look at our different geographical areas and which ones cover the most geographic areas that we can keep in our toolbox for when we need to answer questions about our time period of 1450 to 1750. So I'll give you about 30 more seconds to take a kind of a look at what's going on here and see which ones really stand out as our major belief systems. Okay, so you probably should have realized that we got those big green areas that are happening here with our Sunnis and Islam being very influential all across Northern Africa, into the Middle East, and into Asia. And Islam is the big religion in that time frame and in those areas. So that'd be a good one to make sure that you have in your toolbox and know things about. If we take a look at our Catholics, they're mainly in Europe, as well as our Protestants. So that's kind of one that only kind of stays in one central part of the world. And so there, yes, we need to kind of know them and remember them, but they're not going to be as influential in questions that deal with belief systems that cover major geographic areas. Okay, so moving on, we need to know some of our monarchs and our most powerful monarchs. And these are the ones that have the most power going on in the world in our time frame from 1450 to 1750. And they're the ones that exerted their political and economic power throughout here. And their ability to confront new challenges is the things that kept them in power. So we've got people like Elizabeth I, and she, as a woman, she is the only woman that we really have in this whole thing, and an empire that she's controlling. And for her to be able to keep that, she's had to have been able to do some pretty impressive stuff to make sure that she could stay in power. We got people like Louis XIV and Solomon and Peter the Great, Akbar the Great. Those people really did some great things to make sure that they kept their power. I mean, Montezuma, we know about him and his tribute that was going on for him to keep that power. And what they're doing is they're legitimizing their power. And in our AP world, legitimizing rule is one of those things that College Board loves to ask about. They want to know what was going on that led these leaders to be able to remain in power and legitimize that they were in power. And religion is one of those things that these rulers use to do that. And the religious ideas that were out there that kept leaders in power, as we know, the divine right, which is what was used with Louis XIV, Elizabeth used divine right to some extent for her part. We got the Safavid Shiism. We got the Aztec sacrifices and the tribute of people that were used for them to show their power. We got the Songhay Islam and how they used Islam as a way to keep and maintain their power, and our Confucians with their Confucian principles and making sure that people follow those, keeping themselves into power. Okay, so moving on. We can get to move on. Now, wasn't only religion that was used to legitimize power. We also see that our influential leaders used art and architecture to legitimize their rule. And we see with our Ottomans that using those miniatures there and depicting the sultans and the sultans' daily lives was showing the people how important that they were. We got the portraits of the King dynasty and patronizing the arts, showing that he had the influence to be able to keep his rule. Taj Mahal being built, a very elegant palace for religious purposes, as also a tribute to the wife of our ruler. And of course, we've got Louis XIV building the Palace of Versailles and keeping his nobles there at the palace to show them every day that he was the one who had the most power. So we're going to need to remember some of those things in our monumental architecture as well as religious art were the things that our leaders were using to legitimize our rule. Okay, so moving on. So bureaucracies and a bureaucratic elite. So this is all dealing with our politics. Our Ottomans, as we know, used our janissaries to be able to bring in people to their military power and their bureaucracies. We got our zamindars, our boyars, all using different aspects of bureaucracy to keep their rules going. And recruiting people into there and giving them favors and giving them some power of their own allowed them to maintain their centralized control over the populations and resources of their empires. And they use these bureaucratic elites to collect the tribute, the taxes for them, to be able to get them to be able to pay for all of these grand things that they were doing to show their power and legitimizing their rule. Okay, so moving on, let's start talking about now all of this content that we've gone over and how we're going to start to utilize this in answering our questions and dealing with the thesis part or the claim part of our exam. Okay, so here, let's take a look at and what you think of what are going to be the percentage of the test that requires your ability to write an argument. Now we're talking about writing here. So if we take a look at our different parts here, we got section 1 and section 2. So in section 1, we have part A and part B. Part A is our multiple choice questions, and that is 40% of the total exam weight. And then if we look at part B under section 1, our short answer question. Here, we're going to have to write things, and that is 20% of our exam. Then we get down into section 2 with our free response questions, our document-based question, and our long essay question. And we see that they are dealing with 25% and 15% respectively. So if we add up our exam weighting percentages that we have in section 1 and section 2, what percentage do you see as we need the ability to write an argument? Is it going to be A, over 50%, or B, under 50%? And remember, we're looking at the column under exam weighting. And in that, we're looking at the different parts that deal with actually writing some stuff down. And we need to add up those percentages. And does that come to over 50% or under 50%? Okay, so looking like we've got some that are falling in our correct part. We got some that are still sitting with our other piece. Remember, for those of you, when we're doing this, that we are looking at the exam weighting column of our chart. And we're adding up the percentages of the ones that deal with us having to write an argument. All right. Give you about 10 more seconds here to get your answers in. We still have some that haven't responded yet. Okay, so it's looking like a majority of you did choose A over 50%, and you are correct. Because if we take a look back at our chart here under exam weighting, our short answer questions, we're going to have the ability to write an argument. So there's 20% that we're going to have. And if we look at section 2, our document-based question is 25%. We're going to need to write an argument for that one too. So that puts us at 45%. And then our long essay question, or our LEQ, is another 15%. And there we're going to have the ability, again, to write an argument. So if we put 45% together with 15%, that should bring us to 60% of the exam. We're going to need to be able to write an argument. So that's what we're going to focus in on. Now, when we're looking at, we're going to focus in on our LEQ today. And we'll look at the rubric here to see where we're going to be able to get our points in dealing with writing an argument. So first off, we've got thesis and claim. So this is where we're going to respond to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. This is where our focus is going to be today. So again, our claim, our thesis, responds to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. We're going to kind of go through some of those things with you today. The other part that we're going to look at today is evidence, because we always need to support what we are claiming with evidence. And you can get 1 or 2 points here, and we're going to take focus on our 2-point part, which says that we support our argument in response to the prompt using specific and relevant examples of evidence. And we've taken a look at some of the content that we're going to need to be utilizing to be able to do this. The other part that we're going to throw in here is under our analysis and reasoning section. And again, we're going to take a look at our 2-point part, because we're trying to go for the most points that we can get. And here we demonstrate a complex understanding of the historical development that is the focus of the prompt. And again, we're using evidence to corroborate, qualify, or modify an argument that addresses the question. And we'll kind of see how that goes as we go along. So without further ado, let's take a look at questions, because one of the big things that goes on in your process of answering a question or dealing with a question is understanding the question. So we've put up 2 different questions here, and I want to know from you what the difference is between these 2 questions are and how that difference is going to influence the answer that we are going to give. So again, I want you to read those 2, and I want you to determine what is the difference between the 2 and how is that going to influence our answer. Okay, so our first one says, describe how religion influenced the bureaucracy of the Ottoman Empire. Our second one says, describe how bureaucracy influenced the religion of the Ottoman Empire. So again, what do you see as the difference between these 2 questions? And then how is that difference going to influence how you would answer each of those questions? And it's always good to reread your questions to make sure that you're understanding what they are asking of you. So number one was describe how religion influenced bureaucracy of the Ottoman Empire. And two was how bureaucracy influenced the religion of the Ottoman Empire. Give you about a minute to get your thoughts together and get them written down. So for those of you who are still thinking about what to write, remember, we're looking at these two questions. We want to know what the difference is in our two questions and how that difference is going to influence our answer. Okay, so we've got some good responses showing up here. One thing I want to reiterate, though, to help you ones that are struggling a little bit, we're taking a look at our two questions. And again, our first question is how religion influenced the bureaucracy of the Ottoman Empire. And our second one says, describe how bureaucracy influenced the religion of the Ottoman Empire. So what do you see as the differences of those two questions? And then once you got those differences, how is those differences going to influence our answer? Okay, so we got a number of you that are talking about the differences, but make sure that you're bringing into the part of this, of the question of how are those differences going to influence our answer? Most of you are seeing the differences very well, but we got to work on the how those differences influence the answer. I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds here. So in your answers, most of you got the part of the differences identified very well. The first one was asking us how religion, so what was going on with religion in the Ottoman Empire and how was that used to influence the bureaucracy of the empire? So how was that was religion used to influence how the empire was running things? And number two talks about the bureaucracy influencing the religion of the Ottoman Empire. So here we got to talk about the bureaucracy first and what was going on in the bureaucracy that influenced the religion of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so in one, we wanted religion influencing the bureaucracy, and then the other was just the opposite, where it was a bureaucracy influencing religion. Now, most of you picked up on that fairly easily. The piece that some of you are having a problem with was influence. So how do those differences going to influence our answer? Now, both of these talk about religion and talk about bureaucracy. But in one, we want to make sure that in our answer, we're using religion to show how that changed and made an impact on the bureaucracy. And in our second one, it wanted us to use the bureaucracy as our way of showing how religion was influenced by it. Okay, so that's why we need to make sure that we really read our questions twice to understand what's going on. Okay, so moving on. So we've still got our two questions down here that we're going to look that are here, but I'm going to read you this thesis that was actually written from one of the students taking the AP World Exam. And I want you to determine which number does this thesis answer. And the thesis goes as, the Ottoman Empire's bureaucracy influenced members of the empire to belong to the Islamic religion. The bureaucracy enforced the institution of Devshmir. I keep pronouncing that one wrong. Sorry about that one. Having a hard time with that this morning. This system, also known as the blood tax, forced Christian boys to leave their home for the purpose of training for positions in the empire's bureaucracy. This bureaucratic training included the participants' forced conversion to Islam and resulted in unity and loyalty to the Sultan. Does that thesis go with question number 1? Describe how religion influenced the bureaucracy of the Ottoman Empire? Or does it go with number 2, described how the bureaucracy influenced the religion of the Ottoman Empire? So we got a fair number of you are already getting your answers in. We got a number that haven't answered. So those of you that are kind of struggling with coming up with an answer, remember that we are looking at which of these 2 questions does our thesis answer. So those of you that are still struggling with it, take a look at the very first sentence and see if that helps you in determining which of the 2 questions is this thesis answering. That was a little hint there if you didn't pick up on that. Still got about a dozen more of you that haven't responded yet. I'll give you 10 more seconds to get your answer in, because if you're thinking, we'll give you that little bit of time to think. Remember, take a look at that very first sentence and see if that helps you in making your decision. Okay, so if you answered number 2 or B, you are correct. So our question for number 2 says, describe how bureaucracy influenced the religion of the Ottoman Empire. And in our very first sentence, our student said the Ottoman Empire's bureaucracy influenced members of the empire to belong to the Islamic religion. Okay, so he's right in that first sentence there, you should have seen where they bring up that it's the bureaucracy influencing the religion. Okay, moving on. So I think we're moving on. So in what we've seen so far, we want to be able to attack the prompt. We want to be able to understand what it is really asking us. And you see that chart over on the right-hand side. These are the verbs that AP likes to use in their free response questions. Compare, describe, evaluate, explain, identify, support an argument. And their very favorite part in a lot of our long essay questions is to what extent. They like to ask, to what extent did things happen? And here it is not that things did happen, but did it happen? To what level did it happen? Oops, sorry, I changed that too soon. To what level did those things happen? And using general terms can help, unless we get into it's all the time or some of the time. We want to get a little bit more descriptive than that, a little bit more precise than that in answering those questions, because we really want to make sure that we're showing that we completely understand our question. And the to what extent is where AP, you get to show AP that you really understand what is being asked of you in that type of a question. Now, in attacking our prompts, there are some common errors that we do have. And part of the problem is that people become way too vague in their answers, that they are using very general terms. Now, to start off, that might be okay, but we got to make sure we're going to use some specific evidence in all of this. The other big thing that typically happens with people that do not do well on an essay question is that they completely miss the target. They're talking about things that don't even show up in the time frame or don't belong to that type of empire. And the main types of questions, as I'm sure your teachers have kind of gone over with you, are our causation. So our cause and effect type of questions. We've got our compare and contrast, talking about similarities and differences between things. And there's also continuity and change over time. Now, the thing with continuity and change over time, you've got to remember that you're not being asked if there was continuity and change over time. What the question wants you to deal with is what kind of continuity was happening. So what was the things that were staying the same over the time frame, and what change was there during that time frame as well. So remember, in continuity and change, that you're not being asked if there is continuity and change over time. You're being asked what kind of continuity and change that happens. You're also going to get kind of words like led to. So such and such led to such and such, and to the extent to which. And knowing these kind of questions and what they're leading to as the type of essay question is going to be helpful to you as well. Often our to the extent to which leads to our causation types of questions. But remember, it can also, depending upon how it's worded, that it can lead to continuity and change as well. Okay, so let's take a look at some common errors that are going on here. Here, we're going to know, I want you to take a look at these 5 theses that were actually written on AP exams by students. And I want to know which one is going to be a successful thesis. Now, for those, if you don't remember, a thesis responds to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. So our question is, explain how Islamic states rose to power in the period of 1200 to 1450. So what I want you to do is to take a look at those 5. I want to know which one is a successful thesis. And remember, a thesis responds to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. So is it A? In my opinion, Islamic states rose to power because they had the authority to take over territories. Or is it B? Islamic states struggled at first because of the spread of Christianity. Could it be C? Islamic states were able to rise to power in 1200 to 1450 because of their successful trade and religious conquest. Or do you think it's D? Which states? Islamic states were powerful in 1200 to 1450 because they had a very successful merchant class that made a lot of money and things. Or could it be E? Islamic states were territories in which Islam was in charge. They were powerful and rose up. Muhammad is the major prophet of this religion. Okay, so remember, you're taking a look at your prompt. Explain how Islamic states rose to power in the period of 1200 to 1450. And you're looking for which one of those has a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. Yeah, looks like most of you are picking this one up pretty easily, seeing that it stands out right away. So for those of you that picked C, you are correct. It was also good to see that no one picked A, and that no one picked B, or no one picked E. So that was good that you understood those were not claims that were historically defensible or established a line of reasoning. So very good about picking that it was C, that Islamic states were able to rise to power in 1200 to 1450 because of their successful trade and religious conquest. All right, well, let's move on and keep plugging away at some of these things. All right, so our next question that we're going to look at and talking about our thesis is, to what extent did major religious systems shape society in 1200 to 1450? And what I would like you to do is to, again, determine which of these statements is a successful thesis. Is it A, Buddhism heavily influenced China and has shaped it into the nation it is today? Do you think it's B, I think major religious systems like Islam shape society by changing the government structure? Is it C, religious systems such as Christianity and Islam are similar in that they are monotheistic? Christians follow the words of the Bible while Muslims follow the Quran? Do you think it's D, in the period of 1200 to 1450, religious systems such as Christianity and Islam used their religion to shape the government by limiting the rights of non-believers? Or do you think it's E, religious systems such as Christianity and Islam shaped the government in many ways? And remember that a successful thesis will respond to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. So which of the five do you think is the successful thesis to the question, to what extent did major religious systems shape society in 1200 to 1450? Still got some people responding here. I'll give you a little bit more time to respond. Most of you seem to have picked this one up as well, which is good. For those of you who still need to respond, remember you're trying to see which of these five is a successful thesis to the question, to what extent did major religious systems shape society in 1200 to 1450? We'll give you 10 more seconds for those that still need to respond. All right, so those of you that chose D, which was most of you, you are correct. So in the period of 1200 to 1450, again, using the time frame that it shows in the prompt, because that means that we're responding to the prompt. We're also using religious systems, which is in our prompt. And we are stating our line of reasoning by talking about Christianity and Islam as the religions that shaped government by limiting the rights of non-believers, which is our historically defensible claim. And it was good to see that nobody picked C in this, seeing its weaknesses that were there, because it just doesn't even really address the prompt very much at all. All right, let's try some other things. So here our question is, to what extent did major religious systems shape society in 1200 to 1450? And here we want to know which statement uses evidence to answer the question. Remember, that was where we can get ourselves 2 points in our essay if we use evidence. So we've got 2 answers that were actually written by students on the AP exam. And we're dealing with the question, to what extent did major religious systems shape society in 1200 to 1450? Was it A, in the period of 1200 to 1450, religious systems such as Christianity and Islam used their religion to shape the government by limiting the rights of non-believers? Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain favored Catholicism, but some German princes like Luther's Protestant ideas. Islam also divided Sunni and Shiite groups? Or is it B? In the period of 1200 to 1450, religious systems such as Christianity and Islam used their religion to shape the government by limiting the rights on non-believers. Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain used the Inquisition to remove non-Catholics from Spain and persecute and jail others for religious differences. The Janissaries were Christians taken from their families and forced to convert to Islam. Okay, so again, we're looking for which one of these two statements, A or B, uses evidence to answer our question of to what extent did major religious systems shape society in 1200 to 1450? Was it A or is it B? So for those of you that are still thinking about which way to go, remember we keep reading our things to make sure we understand. So the question that I want you to answer is which of the statement uses evidence? So evidence is something that is going to be used to show why something was happening. So which ones of these actually uses evidence to answer our question? To what extent did major religious systems shape society in 1200 to 1450? All right, for those of you that still haven't responded, we'll give you another 10 seconds or so to be able to get yourselves in and get a response. Okay, for those of you who said B, you are correct. Okay, A only states historical evidence. It's not using actual evidence to go along with that historically defensible claim. Okay, in a B, they specifically use the Inquisition and what the Inquisition was. And they also use the Janissaries for Islam. So we got two very specific things now that are being used in being able to use as evidence to answer our question. And that's what we're going to be making sure that we want to do, is to make sure that we're using specific evidence that is establishing our line of reasoning. Okay, let's take a look at another one. So our question is, contrast the attitude of Christianity and Islam towards trade from 1200 to 1450. Which ones of these is a thesis? Remember, a thesis responds to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. So do you think it's A, Christianity liked trading and Islam liked merchants a lot? Or is it B, the attitudes of Christianity and Islam differed greatly when it came to merchants and trading? Or do you think it's C, both Christianity and Islam valued trade? The Catholic Church owned a lot of property, and Islam was started by the prophet and merchant trader Muhammad. Or do you think it's D, Christianity and Islam differed in their attitudes on trade because Muslims highly valued trade? However, Christian Catholics were suspect of traders with great wealth who loaned money for profit. Okay, so we want to know which one of these is a thesis, A, B, C, or D. Just as a reminder, a thesis responds to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. And the prompt that we have is contrast the attitudes of Christianity and Islam towards trade from 1200 to 1450. So of these four, which one is a thesis? Which one of these responds to the prompt with a historically defensible claim that establishes a line of reasoning. I can give you about 10 more seconds on this one. So those of you who chose D, you are correct. This one states Christianity and Islam differed in their attitudes. So using the word differed deals with our prompt of the verb contrast. So it wanted you to contrast the attitudes. So they said that the Christianity and Islam, which were mentioned in our prompt, that their attitudes differed. So that's dealing with our prompt, responding to it. And having that it's a historical defensible claim, where our Muslims highly value trade and Christian Catholics were suspect of it. And it establishes our line of reasoning as well, talking about why those two felt the way that they did. Okay, moving on to our next part. Reviewing our prompt. Remember, in all of this, kind of summarizing, going after our prompts, make sure that you are reading your prompt twice. It's always good to go in and circle your verbs. You want to go in and underline your key words as well, so that you know what your prompt is asking of you and that you're going to be able to respond to that prompt. So let's take a look at actually writing some of these things. So here is our very first question that we're going to take a look at. Now, if you take a look at what's going on here, it looks like we got a kind of a chicken foot going on here. We got this one long horizontal line and then two lines that kind of go off of that. This is where we're going to make sure that we have a thesis that is going to respond to our prompt and establish a line of reasoning. So responding to our prompt is going to go on our horizontal line, and then our lines of reasoning are going to be in our other two lines. I like to call this a chicken foot. So if we're taking a look at the question, the prompt that is given to us, evaluate the extent to which religion was used to unify the empires in the Americas from 1450 to 1750. So our piece of our thesis, which we're going to respond to our prompt, we would write something like, religion was used to unify empires in the Americas from 1450 to 1750 by. Now our by is going to set up our establishing a line of reasoning. So we could put down for one of them, French monarchs like Louis XIV required his subjects to follow Catholicism in order to gain support. Or we could use Aztec emperors demanded tribute of humans for religious sacrifices, which instilled and control amongst tribute states. Now, one of those is wrong. Which one of those do you think is wrong? Dealing with our prompt of evaluate the extent to which religion was used to unify empires in the Americas from 1450 to 1750. Is it our French monarchs like Louis XIV, or is it our Aztec empires demanding tributes of humans? So in this, we gotta remember which of those two empires that were brought up here is actually in the Americas. All right, this one was fairly obvious to most of you because most of you said that it was French monarchs like Louis XIV. Okay, Louis XIV they're over in France, which is over in Europe, and they're not in the Americas. So it is, even though it is historically true, it does not relate to our question. So we want to make sure that what we're using for our lines of reasoning relate to our question. Now, one of the reasons why we have two is because we really need to just establish one of these to get full credit from AP. So let's take a look at another one. So identifying ways in which monumental architecture was used to legitimize power from 1450 to 1750. So if we said out here, dealing with our prompt, monumental architecture was used to legitimize power from 1450 to 1750. We need to then come up with 2 lines of reasoning that we could do. So I'll give you a little bit to kind of think about this before I actually write in what we have. So I want you to try to think back at our review that we did over content for these 2 things. Now we're looking at monumental architecture. Okay, AP likes to use that term, monumental architecture. And a good way to think of that is palaces or other large monuments that were built during our time frame. So that's what we kind of want to think about for what we would put in for these 2. So if you were thinking something along the lines of Louis XIV built Versailles as an example of his absolute power in France, and that he required officials to live there as a way to constantly keep this symbol before them, then you had some good thoughts going on. And if you also thought about Peter the Great building his palace, which he used built in St. Petersburg, which was used to impress his desire to conform Russia to a Western Europe. So now in these, remember that we needed to establish a line of reasoning and that we have something that is historically defensible. So Louis, we brought in about Versailles, but we also talked about that he forced these nobles to live in Versailles. So he could force his control over them and they could still be in awe and living in opulence during that time. And Peter the Great and his palace in St. Petersburg, he was showing everybody that it was Western ways was what Europe needed to conform to. All right, now it's time for you to try. So I've shown you 2 examples of how to write and attack our prompts. And when you're doing this, make sure that you're going to read your prompt 2 times through. Okay. Now you can't actually circle the verbs on your computer, but write down what you see as the verbs in the prompt. Write down what keywords you see in your prompt. And here we're going to write the beginning of our thesis. So we are going to be looking for a response to the prompt, which is going to go on our horizontal line. So think about a way that you can respond to the prompt. And then think about lines of reasoning that are historically defensible. And the prompt is explain similarities in economic practices between 2 empires from 1450 to 1750. Make sure that you're following your formula of reading your prompt twice, circling your verb, underlying keywords before you start writing. I'm going to give you a couple minutes here to be able to think through what you're going to do. Because remember, we have evidence that we're going to need to start bringing in here to help us establish our line of reasoning. Okay, people seem to be doing a good job with being able to respond to the prompt, filling out our horizontal line. Remember, when you're establishing your line of reasoning and having your historically defensible claim, that specifics are your friend. So if you can use specific examples, that's what we are looking for. And the other thing is, there's not necessarily to worry too much that you've got two of them that are real accurate, because it's one that is going to be the biggest piece when readers are reading your essays. We're putting two in to make sure that we get at least one right. Okay, so if you've got one that you think is a little bit on the superficial side, that's okay, put it in, because you never know that you might hit it right on the nail on the head. Don't feel that you can't put something in because you think it's not specific enough, especially if it's your second example that you are using. But if you can, the more specific you can be, the better we are going to answer the question. Remember to think back of what we talked about when we first got started today, some of the content that we reviewed and some of those major empires that were around between 1450 and 1750. Okay, because bringing those up, and it's good to bring up the ones that cover different geographic areas. Okay, let's get down to about 10 seconds because a lot of you have your things in, which is great. Whoops. Okay, so in this, you should have brought up some of our empires going on between 1450 and 1750. Okay, so our Ottoman Empire was a good one, remember, because that one covers a lot of different things that were going on. We also have our other empires of Spain. They are now reaching across many different areas and their economic practices. So these big empires that are out there from this time frame were good ones to bring in. Bringing in their economic practices of our Ottomans and their trade and how they were handling trade is a great thing. If you brought up your Spanish, what they were doing, especially over in the Americas, are all great things to bring up. So now let's kind of take a look at if you can put things into a correct order and figuring out which one of these does not belong in a good thesis. So our prompt that we are dealing with says, explain one development that changed the role of Central Asia, of Asian nomads from 1200 to 1450. So which one goes first? Is it A, as a result, the Mongols grew in numbers and military might? Is it B, the Mongols eventually conquered China and established the Yuan dynasty? C, is Mongolia is a country still today? D, Central Asian nomads became more settled communities after his rise to power. One development that changed the role of Central Asian nomads from 1200 to 1450 included the rise and power of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan used violence and conquest to unify various tribes. So what order do you think these go in to have an effective thesis? Okay, so remember, we're putting these in the correct order and determining which letter does not belong. Kind of something to help you. Remember when we were doing these, looking at thesis before, that our first part, our horizontal line, was where we responded to the prompt. And then we needed to make our historically defensible claim and establish a line of reasoning. All right, let me give you about 10 more seconds on this one because we're getting near the end of our time and I want to make sure that we respect your time. We still got a couple of things to talk about. Okay, so if you put down that you had E, D, F, A, and B, you are correct. And if you chose that C does not belong, you are right. Now, even though C is true, it just does not really go with our question about our Central Asian nomads from 1200 to 1450. Okay, so some things we want to kind of bring up here near the end of our day today is some resources, because there is a lot of information for you to be able to know. Sometimes seeing things in a different way, presented in different way from different people, actually help you. So some resources that are here for you guys to remember that are there is on YouTube. There is Heimler's history. So if you just type in the search button Heimler's history, you will get all of his videos on his history things. Now, world history is where we're at, so make sure you're focusing in on his world history pieces because he does talk about the other AP exams as well. And as you've probably noticed on our charts and stuff that we're looking at today, freemanpedia.com, he puts together things in terms of our time frames and puts those charts together so you can kind of see how all of those things play out. And don't forget Crash Course World History by John Green on YouTube as well. These are great resources for you to be able to understand your content and kind of put your content into a perspective of using it for evidence for your essays. All right, and that kind of brings us to the end of things. So let's just kind of wrap up, make sure that we hit our goals here. If you could say yay or nay. And remember, we wanted to make sure that we reviewed our AP World content and talk about dates and talk about some of the best facts to know. Did we review the key AP writing skills, specifically on how to answer free response questions with a good argument, as well as kind of understanding what time periods are going to be the ones where you want to put most of your effort in, and a little bit about what the test is going to look like. All right, it's looking like we did a good job there because you guys are all saying yes. All right, so one last thing before we actually go, if you would take a moment, let me get down to this bottom slide here, give us some feedback. If you would go click on that link and fill out the Google form for us. You might find that AP World doesn't show up in one of your choices. We've been trying to get that fixed all week. Hopefully it is for today, but if not, just click on the AP US one so that you can continue on with your form. So if you would take a moment to give us some feedback. Once you've given us a feedback, you are free to go. We thank you for your time spending it with us on this beautiful Saturday morning. And we hope that you have a good rest of your day. If you have any specific questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to type them into the chat and we will be glad to answer them for you. So again, once you've filled out your feedback form, you are free to go and enjoy the rest of your day. And we thank you again for spending your time with us. And once you have that form filled out, feel free to log out and enjoy the rest of your day. We do appreciate you taking the time to spend with us on this beautiful Saturday morning. And as soon as you get your forms filled out, feel free to log out. Enjoy the rest of your day. We do thank you for filling that form out for us because we do like the feedback.
I wonder if there were some connection issues. I had a couple of kids that were in and out a lot. So I wonder if there were some internet connection issues somewhere.
Oh, maybe.
Oh, that's some wonky hair we got going on there. And then I was looking in the class roster and we had a lot of kids that were in there, but listed as offline. I don't know what that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that means either.
Okay,
so our last few that are here, feel free to log yourselves out once you got your forms filled out.
A lot
Glad that you hung with us, but you don't have to stay with us.
A lot of them were from Hartselle with Cooper, so I messaged them.
Yes,
Hey,
I had a couple. I teach at Hartselle. I'm the
Okay.
there, and I had a couple email me and say that they had some issues, and so they logged in on their phones.
okay,
Maybe that's it.
okay.
That could be.
Yeah, it was. I'm trying to remember who names. One was an Anna, one was a Mercedes.
Yes, Mercedes sent me an email
Okay.
and said that she just had to log in on her phone. So I'm gonna make a little post on our Google Classroom that just says if you had issues, let me know and I can go back and look at our attendance later.
Yeah. Do you have a Dylan Hilland?
No.
Okay, because he was in and out like 5 or 6 times, like in a short period. So I was wondering if there was just some connection issues somewhere.
No, I don't have a Dylan, but a couple of people email me. I think maybe it was just because they logged in on their phone. That's why it showed them offline.
That could be. Well, that's good that they were like, hey, I gotta let my teacher know.
Yeah, well, I'm letting it be a grade, so they were letting me know for sure if they can't get in.
Oh, very good. Very good.
All righty. Well, thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for spending the morning with us.
See you. Have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. I'm going to hit stop recording.